Hello, everyone. It's James Maloney, the host and editor of our podcast, Humanity Examined. I'm super excited to announce that we are starting a YouTube channel in the hopes of adding another human dimension to our conversations. We hope that you enjoy our next conversation with Professor Timm Triplett from the University of New Hampshire. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Humanity Examined, the show where we talk with individuals about how to get the most out of life through the lens of humanities. I'm James Maloney. Today, I'm joined by Professor Timm Triplett from the University of New Hampshire. Professor, thank you so much for being with me today.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. And so we are here at the Nashua Public Library, and we just got done with an event called Philosophy for Everyone. So if you were to kind of summarize in a few words, what was that event? What was the purpose? And how did you come up with that?
Well, this was inspired by New Hampshire Humanities and funded by them. They asked us, professors in the humanities at UNH and elsewhere, to come up with topics that they thought might be engaging for a public audience. And so I thought, well, the public is everyone, and philosophy really can be appreciated by everyone. And so I thought of the topic of philosophy for everyone, and that's what I talked about this evening. It's open to the public, and I talked about how philosophy can be intimidating, and people can think, oh, philosophy, that's for the really smart people, and I'm not smart, or that's for the people that have read Plato and Kant, and I've never read them, and that's for people who've taken a lot of philosophy courses, and I've never taken a philosophy course, or even I've never even been to college. And they therefore think that philosophy is something that stands off apart and maybe above anything that they could grasp or could engage with. And I think the theme of my presentation was actually everybody can engage with philosophy. And I think that the best way to illustrate that is to talk about philosophy and children. And one of the theses I had was that children can be surprisingly adept at philosophy. I think a lot of people understand about the idea that childhood is a time of wonder, and the child will just be kind of in awe at experiencing the world for the first time, and everything is fresh and everything is new. And part of that newness and part of that freshness and part of that wonder is that they think about philosophical questions. Mm-hmm. How did this get made? How did this come to be? Why is this the way it is? What are these rules? Do I always have to follow these rules? What's fair? What's unfair? Children are very engaged in these questions to a surprising level of sophistication. And so one of the things I pointed out in my talk was, if children can do philosophy, anybody can. You can too, speaking to, we had an audience of adults, and, right. Yeah. And so, you can do philosophy. And I actually started out being a professor. I gave them a little test.
Right, that's right. And about the quiz that you handed out, yeah. First I was like, oh, regular quiz, but then the stumper, or the thing that was very intriguing to me, was that it was for young kids, it was for young children. And even, as an adult, as a 21-year-old doing this quiz, there are some questions where you really sit back and think about how you're going to answer. And that made for some really interesting dialogue tonight. Mm-hmm. So that was a very interesting mm-hmm. way to open that. So mm-hmm. What made you think that was a great way to open?
Well, the quiz already existed because I have been going into classrooms as young as second graders, and I've worked with all elementary school grades and middle school and high school, bringing philosophy out of the academic world, the university, the college, into these venues. And so the quiz was already there. I already had it. And I thought it would be really kind of fun to introduce the topic by having these adults take this little quiz that I would give to the children. And I told them that they could either answer the questions as they are now or as they thought they might have been when they were in the third grade, right? But you're right. They're simple scenarios, or simple questions, straightforward, but they already lead to philosophical questions, like what is bravery, what is a number, what kinds of things think, and maybe one of the stumpers you mentioned was, I imagined a scenario where a child was in a situation where they either had to break a promise or break a rule. And because they'd gotten themselves into a situation where they had to either break the promise or break this rule about walking across the grass when there's a big sign, do not walk across the grass. But to get back in time to keep to the promise they'd given to their mother to be back by a certain time, they would have to break the rule about not walking across the grass. So the children are presented with a dilemma. It's a moral dilemma. And what's the right thing to do? Is there a right thing to do? Can people reasonably disagree about what the right thing to do is? And if so, where do we go from there? How do we resolve it if it can be resolved? These are all examples of some of the issues that are raised as we reflect philosophically, in this case about morality. Right. But in my other examples, you can reflect philosophically about what is a number, what kinds of things think, what is bravery, and so on.
Yeah, and on a specific note, our conversation was about technology and if computers can think. I was also, looking at your profile, and I saw that you are interested in researching computer ethics. So I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about that and how that plays into what we talked about tonight, if computers can think. Maybe what is your take on that?
There are a lot of issues pertaining to computer ethics that go beyond the more narrow question of whether computers can come to think. But let's just take that as one example. I mean, computer ethics is a vast realm. But let's think about what it would be for computers to be able to think in something like the way humans think. Now, obviously, computers are designed now that they can, you can ask Alexa a question and she or it or whatever you want to say will come up with a sometimes plausible answer. Is that thinking? No, I don't think so. But some philosophers and scientists and linguists and people that work in artificial intelligence believe that it's only a matter of time before these machines are so sophisticated that we'll have to accord them the property of thinking just as well or even better as humans. And so there are ethical issues associated with that. If they're capable of that kind of thinking, and let's imagine computers like C3PO, right, that seems to not only engage conversationally and have intelligence in that way, but seems to have emotions and feelings. Right. If that's possible, then one of the ethical questions is, do we have to treat them with all the kinds of rights and moral responsibilities that we would treat a human being? Another question is, should we even pursue making such things or developing such things? Because what if they become much better and smarter at virtually everything compared to us, and then they start not caring much about us because we are to them what mice are to us, right? So there are ethical questions about should we even pursue this kind of technology? And then there are ethical questions, supposing we do, and supposing that we can begin relating to them in ways that suggest, and their behavior suggests that they are really as much persons as we are, then it seems like we have a whole host of ethical responsibilities. But a philosophical question is, how do we find that out?
Yeah.
Already, even with one of the very early computer programs that tried to converse in a therapeutic way with people was called ELIZA. And it was very simple and not very plausible compared to what computers can do now. I think ELIZA was constructed in around the 80s, I think. I think it was before the 90s. At any rate, it was kind of a pseudo-therapist. And as simple as the program was at that time, some people felt like it really cared about them and that it really mattered to this simple software program how I was doing, And if we can be misled, and it certainly is a case of being misled because the program doesn't care a whit about you or me. If we can be misled in that way with that simple a program, I think that we're going to be very easily led to believe that a robot or some kind of moving computer is conscious and aware and thoughtful in the ways that we are, well before it actually is. That's my own view. And then the question is, but could it be in principle, at least, that such a machine could have just as much agency and self-awareness and care for its future as you and I do? If that were indeed possible, first of all, how do we decide that it's there, that it has that capability? And then how do we incorporate it into the moral community?
It certainly brings about a significant amount of wonder because only time can tell. And, we can see right now AI technology is rapidly expanding, rapidly. Right. So it's important to ask ourselves these questions and to think about it, to ponder it, to see the extent of it. So that's very interesting, and thank you for your take on that.
Sure.
I also wanted to talk about your recently published essay called "You're Astonishing." It is a great paper, and if there's one sentence to describe it, it's wow. I am so glad to be here right now. So if you could, well, first of all, for our audience, it's published on a website called Aneon. Aneon, is that right? Yep.
It's aeon.com or org, I'm not sure, but if you just would Google AEON, you'll find it. It's a nice online intellectual journal or magazine, but if I say intellectual, it shouldn't be too scary because it's really intended not for academics, but for a general audience. And so anybody that's interested in philosophy, I think, would find a lot of really cool essays on that on their website. Yeah, I was checking it out. Very easy. It's very nice to read. Very easy to read. It's not super complicated. And no ads.
No ads either. It was wonderful.
If you go to that journal and enjoy it, contribute a little bit toward their expenses because it's a very nice format. They have reader comments, and that the author can then respond to those comments, and a lot of variety, and highly recommended.
Yeah, for sure. So with that being said, can you tell us a little bit about your paper? What inspired you to, write this text on life and enjoying life and being present?
Sure. Starting with the idea that one reflects, for example, on how one's parents met. And if you think about it, in almost every case, there's some chanciness that goes on in events that preceded your parents' meeting. So in my case, my mother met my father because my mother's roommate in college was my father's sister. And that is, my father and his sister lived right across the street from campus. So it was inevitable that the sister would say, "Oh, come to my house," and then would, met my father, and everything proceeded from there. And so I think about who assigned the college students to which dorm rooms back at that time. Some anonymous bureaucrat. Just things could have gone a little bit differently. He or she could have taken an early lunch break and come back, and then because they went to the lunch break earlier, they would have assigned, just, because it's all kind of random. They put these different roommates together, and maybe my father's sister and my mother never would have been roommates, and then they wouldn't have met, and I would not be here talking to you. More dramatically, there's a family lore says that my grandfather was he was doing business in England, and he got a call at the last minute that he might have some business opportunities up in Scotland. And so he went up to Scotland, and in doing so, he canceled his planned return to America on the Titanic, right? So suppose that business, how did that business connection get made? Somebody randomly, "Oh, by the way, did you hear about so-and-so?" Right? Just coming out of a meeting, and if they hadn't met on the hallway at that time, I would not be here. So these are ways of illustrating what I call the contingency of existence. And it seems to me that these sorts of facts suggest that the chance that everything would come together in just the way it has, and that it had to come together in order for me to be born, and similarly for you to be born, is, prior to any of this happening, astonishingly small. And so when the title of the essay is "You're Astonishing," what that means is it's just on reflection, it's just amazing, it's incredible that everything came together just as it did, because if things had been ever so slightly different, even with one's parents, to say nothing of one's grandparents, to say nothing of one's ancestors 200 years ago, if any of those things had gone ever so slightly differently, things would have come about that, yes, there would be other people born, but not you, not me. And so the chances of any living person actually being born and being able to enjoy their lives is, it seems to me, astonishingly small. We have these lotteries, where currently the current thing is there's over $1 billion in some lottery. Well, your chances of winning that lottery are not very big, but your chances of being born, given all that had to precede, are infinitesimally even smaller than the chance of winning the lottery. So that's why I think we can celebrate and say, this is amazing. This is cool. I've won the existence lottery. And here I am. It almost didn't happen. It's incredible that it did happen. So there's a sense of wonder. How could that be? And I think there's an interesting philosophical question there. But there's also a sense of celebration.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved how celebratory it is. It's such a feel-good something to read and be like, wow, it's really great being here right now. Right here, right now. What are the chances?
Right.
But as I was reading your paper, I was also kind of thinking about, and I'm not sure if this is a fair comparison, but I was wondering if it has anything to do with the butterfly effect to some degree. Now, I know that this is kind of a little different of a theory, but I just know that's kind of where my mind was going, as to how something so small could create huge effects. In this sense, we're talking about probability of events, which are astonishing. So I just kind of thought that was an interesting thought.
Yeah, there is a relation. The butterfly effect puts a little bit of a wrench in the deterministic mechanism that a lot of philosophers, maybe not a lot, but there are many philosophers and scientists who think that the world is structured in a completely deterministic way, such that God starts the mechanism, if it was God, and maybe there's no God, but whatever got this whole thing started, it kind of works itself out in a machine-like way, such that if you knew everything about the way the world was at the start, and all the forces and all the, where all the particles are and at, what vectors they have and how they're interacting with other particles, and that's a lot of stuff to have to know, but suppose you could, or suppose God does, that it's inevitable that everything works out the way it does. And some philosophers could use that to undermine the sense of astonishment about it, if it's all been determined in advance. In my essay, I push back against that. I argue that even if the world is completely determined, it still is astonishing that the deterministic course went in such a way as to include myself, right? I'm having us think of this, each of us, from our own subjective perspective. So you would think about it for yourself, and the listener would think about it for themselves. And the butterfly effect, challenges the idea of determinism. That it suggests that there are, even given the forces as they were 100 years ago or 13 billion years ago, during the Big Bang or whatever, the idea is that there's a kind of built-in chaos, and you can't really, because of the ways in which these very small events like the flap of a butterfly's wings can reverberate and create conditions that could not have been predicted in advance. Even if you assume that there are just these forces that govern the universe and nothing else, it's not clear that you still have determinism, or it's not clear that you can have determinism, because the chaos may mean that there's, in principle, no deterministic course. The flap of the butterfly's wings can have these effects that could not have been determined at the time of the flapping of the wings. Now, some determinists say it's actually not true, that even if there is this kind of built-in chaos, there still is a way to account for a deterministic universe. That is not an area that I've delved into very deeply, but I know that there's philosophical debate about that. But just to your point, it does relate to the issue of uh, how we account for the conditions that came to be, that were required, that seemed to be required. I don't want to say they must have been required, because there are other ways to challenge my thesis, as there is in all philosophy. But it looks as though the ways in which the universe had to be at the beginning still does not, if it had to be a certain way at the beginning, it still does not really show that there's some inevitability about my being here. And so I think that there's still lots of room for thinking that even if the world is determined, even if the butterfly effect still leads to a deterministic universe, that deterministic universe led to me, and it's so easy to imagine that it might not have. If the deterministic course of the universe had had that roommate assigning bureaucrat go to lunch a little bit earlier, it would all be determined that I was not here. But as it turned out, it's all determined that I am here, if determinism is true.
Yeah. Wow. It's crazy when you put it into that perspective. And thank you so much for talking about it. On that note, we're going to end things here. But Professor, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me and to talk about all things philosophy. To our listeners, we will see you next time. Take care.
Okay. Thank you, James.
Thank you. Oh, hey, didn't see you there. Thank you so much for watching our interview today. For more content, please be sure to check us out on social media. Those links will be in the description. Special thanks again to Professor Triplett for talking with me, and to the Nashua Public Library for hosting this wonderful event. I had a great time. We also have one major announcement involving humanities. Coming up for our St. Anselm students, if you have work or art that you are extremely proud of, that you love, and you want to see it published, well, now is your chance. You can submit your work to the Humanitas Journal, a journal full of student work, full of wonderful creative ideas, and it's going to be a wonderful piece, and I highly, highly encourage students to submit their work and to get their ideas out there. It's going to be wonderful. Links regarding that can be found in the description as well. And be sure to submit your work to the Humanitas Journal at anselm.edu. Also, be sure to follow those social media accounts as well. We will see you next time. Thank you all so much for watching, and take care.